Hi, hello everybody. It's rather nice to be here speaking in this rather welcoming room I always feel here at the Société, and speaking on obviously a subject with which I have had something of a long association, geology. To get straight into what I'm going to cover, I've just sort of almost spun a coin for three topics, which will embrace other things, but three topics for my talk, and these relate to people whom I sort of, for one reason or another, have a special regard for in their geological contributions. Just one final general point. The relationship between geology and archaeology, for most of you here, is undoubtedly one which is the geological aspects of archaeology rather than geology per se. And the actual things I'm talking about are going to be something of a mixture of the two. But to get straight into it, the latter part of the 19th century, from about 1860 onwards, saw a major confrontation in the geological world concerning the age of the Earth. And there was on one side of this argument Lord Kelvin, noted the preeminent scientist virtually of that generation, and his field was thermodynamics, and his work is still sort of up there amongst the greats of thermodynamics. However, he took it upon himself in the 1860s, it would have been, to consider the age of the Earth. Attempts were being made to work out what this was. And he used his knowledge of thermodynamics to make a calculation which first produced an age of about 40 million years, and that reduced over the next 30 years till the early 1890s to 20 million years. However, the geological establishment, the geologists who had more than a century behind them of detailed studies of the rocks and the processes involved, and also supported more latterly by Charles Darwin and his work on the origin of species, they had concluded that there was no way that the age of the Earth could be less than several hundred million years. And this was a very bitter confrontation at times. And it was in the sort of middle of this period that there came to Jersey. The Jesuits were established at the Maison Saint-Louis, that's more recently the Hotel de France, and they had a strong scientific element to them and did a lot of teaching in science. And in 1881, a Jesuit, Charles Nuri, came to Jersey, and immediately he'd had quite a lot of scientific training. He immediately set about, because he loved doing it, he walked the island everywhere and he observed every rock outcrop that he could possibly find all over the whole island. And within 4 to 5 years, an incredibly short time if you think about it, just imagine you doing it now, setting out to do it. In that time, he produced a map of the island. This is Charles Nuri, and that is the map that he produced was published in 1886, and it is highly regarded by geologists ever since. And you could take that map and go out and you could use it today, and you wouldn't be so far out in what you were doing. He wasn't actually a member of the Société in 1886 or in 1881 when he started work, but the esteem in which this map was held immediately led to his being elected, believe it or not, a membre d'honneur of the Société in 1887. A very rapid rise in terms of the Société. And I just want to look at one little aspect of his work, which is quite intriguing, and that is the pinnacle. I don't know how many of you here know it. It distresses me somewhat these days to find out how many young people wouldn't know what the pinnacle was, or le pinacle as I rather prefer calling it. I mean, it's a remarkable piece of geology, that, and he wrote an account of the origin of this, and you can see here, if I can get the little machine to work, you can see this black line here. This is the line of a dike dipping towards the left as you look at it, beneath the pinnacle. And it's strongly eroded on this side, and at the bottom of the pinnacle on the western side where it drops into the sea, there's quite a large cave underneath it. And this little black spot here on this side, this is the eastern side, the land side, there is that. But if you look at the plan, there is the pinnacle, and this view here is from across here, so that the black line which you see here, this dike which was eroded, in fact runs here on this side, and this is where the vertical cliff is, and that's where the deep undercut is. But just on this side here, there's a deep gully which goes in underneath some head deposits, rubble deposits there, and you can go right through that and out the other side, showing that the pinnacle itself, in its fundamental structure, is separated from the main heights of Les Landes. And you can read this, I'm not going to translate it. If you don't know French, you'll have to look it up afterwards. He predicted that because of the undercutting of the pinnacle, which is a very reasonable assumption, I think, that it wouldn't be here, it wouldn't be there 100 years hence. So this is 1886 that he predicted that. Well, you know now that he couldn't have produced a photograph in colour like I've just done if it had gone. So it did happen in that time. But the point I really want to make here is that if I pose to you two simple questions and you search your soul for this, how would you answer it? How long has the pinnacle been there in that sort of form, and how long is your estimate of how long it will last there? Will you agree with him that it won't be there at the end of the next century, or do you feel that he's still sort of underestimating or the time involved? And it would be very easy to say that because of that statement, that Nouri was making a big mistake here, that it wasn't geology anymore. He'd lost the plot. But the background of what I said about the arguments about the age of the Earth are very pertinent here, because he was a Jesuit priest, and the church wasn't always in favour of the idea of evolution and for the origin of species, and so he must have been aware of these undercurrents or overcurrents, as it were, in terms of the age of the Earth when he made this sort of prediction. In the back of his mind, I'm quite sure he's regarded a much shorter time involved. The actual age of the Earth is roughly 4.6 billion years, which is quite a bit older than any of the ideas that even existed at that time. So that was Nouri. one of the geological greats, as Dr. Ralph Nichols, one of our members, calls it, geologist, and I think he's right. And Arthur Murrow also praised him extensively, and I do too. His little booklet is great reading. What this map of the whole island, this white arrow shows the outcrop of the Roselle conglomerate, and that's what I want to treat next. And this involves a number of different, quite remarkably widespread threads here. This is a late friend of mine, Derek Laming, who mapped the Torquay red beds around Torquay, and I had him over here in Jersey to give a talk in the late 70s, and here we are, or me photographing him at the little bay below Le Taquerel Fort at the Tête des Hougues. And you'll notice the conglomerate here with these big rounded boulders in it, and that is typical Roselle conglomerate. And the Roselle conglomerate, he had a bizarre idea of the origin of it. I won't go into it here, Nuri that is. But the actual final sort of assembly of arguments and coming to a definitive conclusion didn't happen until the 1930s. But what I want to do is to go back a little bit. Here is a French group of geologists with me showing them around, and this is at Tête des Hougues, and you can see the size of some of the boulders. Some of them are very big. Now I'm going to jump. I don't know if any of you recognise that picture. I mean, it's in the archives of the Société. This is, I find it quite delightful, Major Ribot. And this is him in about 1913 on military service in India, or as it then was India. But in fact the Punjab, which is northern India, and in fact the salt range where the next photographs I'm going to show come from here is a sort of semi-arid or at times very arid area. And this is before he could have known that much about the geology of Jersey. You might like to read this was written by another geologist in Jersey, George Plyman, publishing in 1923. So that's 10 years after Ribot was out in India, and when in fact he'd come back to Jersey and was embarking on the major part of his Société Jersiaise career. We've already heard of one of his feats, which was the drawings of the Marcondry hoard. But what he noticed was the accumulation of pebbles in the gorges that he was looking at in the Punjab. You see again a reminder of the salt range there, and he took these two photographs here, which he gave me the full use of ever since, and you can see just gullies without any vegetation, mountainous gullies, and you can see these isolated boulders here. Some of them, there's a very big one there, some are huge, which they knew out there where they came from and how they got there. They were flash floods from the hills back of this gully, which just accumulated weathered boulders over periods of anything from 1 to 50 years, depending upon the gully in the particular area. And then a flash flood comes and the whole lot is swept down these valleys and spread out onto the plain in front. And he reckoned that this was a very good explanation of the Roselle conglomerate. However, Plyman, writing that article that I just showed you there, didn't agree with him, but he put forward several arguments, extraordinary really when you think about it. He thought they might be volcanic in origin, glacial in origin, or marine in origin. And the possibility, obviously, from the Ribot example that he'd been put to him, also river action in the mountains. And it wasn't actually even after that article was published in 1923 that the H.W. Corns in 1933 published his article in the Bulletin. It's a very long article. He got sidetracked by other arguments that had intervened, but he finally came down on the side of this being the origin of the Roselle conglomerate. I mean, that observation by Ribot is striking in my view. It's one of the most sort of thinking outside the box sort of thoughts that I could possibly imagine anybody having. Even then, in 1933, following Corns's article, there was still total uncertainty about the age of it, which was being argued about very considerably right until the post-war years. And this next map shows you Jersey here, Alderney up here. This is the French coast, Cap Fréal somewhere down there. And these are mountainous. This is a reconstruction from 520 million years ago of our area, and at the time there were mountains there which were so alpine, so Himalayan in size, and hence the Roselle conglomerate. There's been very good work done on these red beds, as they're called, by David Went, who also did his thesis on these rocks here, and he's published quite recently a guide to the geology of Alderney, which embraces the adjacent coast there. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do something more, in fact, on Jersey together. So that's the story of one of Major Ribot's contributions to geology, striking one. And the next one, jumping in terms of time, we're not 520 million years ago here. These are the head cliffs at Beauport, the rubbly orangey head deposits, which is angular fragments of the local rock, which is here has fallen from these cliffs during the last coal stage, last ice age, if you will, and forming these cliffs in so many of our bays. Notably, perhaps one thinks of Bonwy, and of course they are relatively unstable, these cliffs, and there's been lots of landslips. In 1934, the members of the Société Géologique et Minéralogique de Bretagne, of which Marie Van this morning, she's a member, of course, and knows a lot about the history also of that society. They had a major trip into Jersey, which was led, amongst other people, by Arthur Mourant, Dr. Arthur Mourant, and A.J. Robinson, Rufus Robinson. And a couple of the important drawings in that article, which was published on this trip in 1936, were drawn up by a lady, Monsieur Casimir. She was notable somewhat later because she did quite a lot of geology outings with Walter Klupfel during the German occupation, and got a bit of stick for that, but in fact it was always reckoned that there's just two, in fact, geologists who were just interested in things. Anyway, she drew up this very interesting section, And I would also mention of her that she actually taught me when I was at Victoria College Prep briefly after the war. So there's a nice link there. But this shows you just the cliffs coming down from the heights above Bonwy. You can imagine the Cheval Rock building here, and the vertical cliff where there's been a recent collapse, of course. And at the bottom, this head sits on a raised beach of beach cobbles, undercut right at the bottom here. And then it goes down the beach, and if you look carefully, this is just one section through. You have to dogleg it to get the full feature of it, but it drops to the low tide here. But what I want you to notice here is the high tide. That's the present high tide, and that was the above the level of the high tide of today. This was. And this actual diagram was very advanced for its time. I mean, I've put on a very modern naming of that interglacial high sea level cobble beach as 5E. That's the marine isotope stages, which all these sea levels are worked out or referred to these days. And this cliff here is one that was eroded or certainly existed in the previous time here, and even more previous up here. But that was also linking the Société, because there are those three people who were involved in the production of this article and also took the people around Jersey. But I want to jump now to La Cotte here. And
John, can I just slightly over time?
5 minutes, yeah.
No, you're slightly over.
Matt this morning mentioned the question of me talking about this, and I just want to cover briefly the contribution of, in just a moment I'll come to him. This is a cross-section through, and you can see the resemblance between Monsieur Casimir's drawing with a steep cliff and cobbles at the bottom and head-like sediment there, but there's a big difference here which I'm leading towards. Père Bourdeau, whom also has been mentioned, he worked at La Cotte slightly prior to the Second World War, but then he took it up again in the early 50s and worked through, and he did this work on his own at La Cotte for 7 or 8 years, and this is the sort of thing you saw you still see in La Cotte, which is a rubble deposit here, and he was able to spot in this. You can see beds almost horizontal there, but more steeply dipping there, and there's a line of separation here which he spotted. And that line of separation separates the beds here from the beds here. This is not a solid cliff. The solid cliff is behind here. And what he recognised was a set of observations which had this as the same age as the one I showed you at Bonwy, but the cliff which is undercut here is older than that raised beach, not younger. In the case of Bonwy, it's younger. The sediments here are younger, and this is the basis now that we understand of the significance of the last 200,000 years of erosion around Jersey's coast. And that was Bourdeau's major contribution to the evolution of La Cotte Cave. So both those, or the three major people I've mentioned, Nouri, Ribot and Buddha all made quite exceptional geological observations which had a lot to contribute and have not in any sense been sort of denied by further research. Even, you can understand now, we've had talking about this in the earlier discussions, about how you perceive the past. Nuri was of his time, and therefore time in his time was perceptions of it totally different from ours. I think of 4.5 billion years for the age of the Earth. He was thinking perhaps of 20 million, 30 million years. Totally different framework within which he was operating. So that is always what one has to bear in mind, looking at the past, that you interpret things in the understanding of what knowledge was at the time. Thank you.